Welcome to my second mini lecture on Richard Powers' The Overstory. I'm entitling this mini lecture Nicholas Hole, Thoreau, and the Genre of Fable. And I'm only going to look at a very small portion of Nicholas Hole's introductory chapter. From the onset, Powers wants us to be aware of representations of how we represent nature and to be aware of other media. The second paragraph of this chapter begins: people are hurling stones at the giant trunks. The nuts fall all around them in a divine hail. It happens in countless places this Sunday, from Georgia to Maine. Up to Concord, Thoreau takes part. He feels he is casting rocks as a sentient being with a duller sense than his own, yet still a blood relation. Old trees are our parents and our parents' parents. Perchance, if you would learn the secrets of nature, you must practice more humanity. Several things I want to say about this opening paragraph. To begin with, this changing of scale, a theme that has come up multiple times already. In contrast to a dominant culture that fetishizes and focuses almost exclusively on individuals and uses individuals as a way to process history, um, Powers does something different. He starts general, then moves specific, and thinks about the sort of shared natural ritual. Put differently, rather than focusing on Thoreau hailing stones at a chestnut tree, Powers begins by showing how it's a national ritual, right? That people everywhere are hurling stones. Um, on this Sunday, from Georgia to Maine, everyone's participating in this ritual. And Thoreau just becomes one part of this larger national ritual. But as this paragraph progresses, it zooms in more, right? The scale focuses, and we go again from the general national community, a general national ritual, to Thoreau, into Thoreau's diaries, which is the final section. Old trees are our parents, and our parents' parents, perchance. If you learn the secrets of nature, you must practice more humanity. So I want to meditate even more on these final two sentences of this paragraph. Old trees are our parents, and our parents' parents, perchance. If you would learn the secrets of nature, you must practice more humanity. And I want to suggest here that Powers wants the readers to be aware of how and who is representing nature. These two sentences are italicizing, signifying, signaling even, that this is a citation. And we might guess that it's Thoreau's because Thoreau's name is mentioned two sentences previously. But it requires the active reader to look up from where this quote actually comes from. It asks us to do research, to put the book down, and to explore a wider ecological web of textuality. To put this differently, I want to suggest here that Powers is not fetishizing this idea of a singular contained book or author, in parentheses, Powers, but rather wants us to think relationally and wants us to think about being aware of how different people in different historical and geographical contexts represent nature, and more specifically, trees. So if you did look up this quote to see where it comes from, indeed, it comes from Thoreau, and it's from his journal entry dated October 23rd, 1855. So Powers asks us to look outside the text. And once we go outside the text, we're placed in 1855. It's only then, maybe at this moment, that you could write the date of when this takes place in the margins of your book. And we can think about this historical moment even more. One way to contextualize this moment is to think about that Thoreau's journal entry is occurring 4 years prior to Darwin's famous publication, which changed our understanding of our place in the web of life and how humanity is inextricably interconnected within the natural world. Which raises the question, where do we find philosophy? Where do we find theory? Do we always have to go to a work that's sort of marked as philosophy or as something I hope I've been stressing the entire semester? Do we need to learn to read literature as a form of philosophy, as a form of theory? So again, Powers is asking us to read intertextually. He doesn't want us to stay contained within this book. He doesn't want to fetishize and perpetuate this ideology that books have a singular author and that we should be bound by a capitalized B book. Rather, we should learn to read in different ways, just as we need to learn to read trees in more creative, um, new ways, in new paradigms. So too do we have to learn to read or change our approach to reading books. So not only is Thoreau engaging in intertextuality, directly citing Thoreau, but he's also practicing literary analysis, that his narrative is doing the work of analysis. If we look at the sentences prior to the italicized quotes, he feels he is casting rocks as a sentient being with a duller sense than his own, yet still a blood relation. This is a direct meditation on Thoreau's journal. So I want to return to Thoreau's quote. So what we see in looking at these two passages together is that Powers is lifting the language of Thoreau without using any quotation marks or italics, right? Thoreau says that he cast a rock at a sentient being. Powers writes that uses the same language. He feels he is casting rocks at a sentient being. And I think the reason we can say perhaps that Powers' novel is engaging in a form of literary analysis is the way that he's actually reflecting upon Thoreau's own texts. Thoreau has this insight that trees themselves are sentient, right? That they're living, feeling, even thinking things. Again, Powers uses that language, lifting the language of sentient beings, but he takes it further. Powers is going to say this is the first page of Nicholas Hull's chapter that the tree is a distant blood relation. And that's a more powerful, stronger metaphor than the web of life or other metaphors I think that are more common to think about or to frame ecological thinking. And it's interesting, and again, if you read this novel carefully, the way that Powers is in dialogue with different ecological thinkers and the way that his text begins to comment upon and analyze in a poetic way those various thinkers from Thoreau to John Muir, and we'll continue on as we have this discussion. So from the journal section cited in the previous slide, Thoreau ends his paragraph with the question, what is the moral of such an act? And the question of morals pertains to the question of a genre that I don't think we think enough about in contemporary literature, which is that of the fable. A fable, of course, is a short story that's typically concerned with animals as characters, and they convey a moral. And I want to think about how much Powers is crafting a contemporary fable, one that's not reductive, that is a simplistic answer, but one that's thinking deeply about the complexity of what fables mean and looking for narratives, episodes with different morals. And as evidence to this suggested reading, I want to return to the opening page that we've been looking at in the paragraph preceding the one we've been examining. The word fable actually appears on the first page of Nicholas Hull's chapter, giving credence to this idea of reading this dense and complex novel through the prism of fable. But did you see the word? It's difficult to see because it appears in adjectival form. If you look near the bottom of the page, we see the sentence, here it is, the fabled tree banquet of America. One of the things you'll see very quickly is that Powers wants to challenge us and teach us how to see. And maybe that's just one of the central activist projects of his complex fable is learning to see. It doesn't see in a literal way. We need to find alternative ways of seeing, challenging ways of seeing. And again, even at this moment, seeing fable, which is almost hiding in this adjectival form. But I think this becomes a clue of how to read this book, this challenging book, in its entirety. So, as you're reading this week's selection, I want you to consider how this novel is teaching us to see and hear myriad fables, contemporary fables. Again, not the simplistic, reductive fables where it's spelled out for us in an explicit fashion that doesn't require us to do any critical work. This novel is going to teach us to hear the morals for living in a world defined by systemic violence towards trees and the natural worlds more generally. And moreover, it's going to teach us to see and hear morals for living in a new world. And this is the activist energy of the novel that will become more pronounced as the novel unfurls.